Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at this big picture session on data with a purpose, where we'll be covering insights from an emerging learning collaborative for outcomes-based partnerships. My name is Eleanor Carter and I'll be chairing the session today. This is taking place as a hybrid session at the Social Outcomes Conference. So it's really great to be able to welcome our online participants. Thank you and welcome to the Zoom room. If you're here in person, please do also feel able to join Zoom in order to participate in the chat function. And I'd just like to say a big thank you for everyone not using the audio function on their laptops, because we've had so little of that awful reverb noise. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to turn to the theme of our session, data with a purpose. It's not data for data's sake. It's data to improve social or improve environmental outcomes. And we know that this is a space with a very energetic community of data users. We know that in outcomes-based partnerships, data is often a key part of what is driving these and potentially making the difference or making them different. So those working on outcomes-based projects are generating an enormous volume of data. This brings a new urgency to the task of navigating, connecting, and sense-making all of this to inform practice. Each of our panelists uses data in different ways to improve practice and learning and ultimately improve outcomes. And today we have a session in two parts. So part one, you can think of this as the big ambition section. So we want to introduce an emergent learning and data collaborative. I'm very pleased to welcome Julia Greenland. Julia is Director of Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights at Girl Capital Africa with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, CIF. Thank you so much for joining us, Julia. We also have Professor Sandro Cabal joining us online. Professor Sandro leads on strategy and public management at INSPA, which is a leading non-profit business school in Brazil. And we'll also have comments from our own Dr. Mara Airoldi. Mara is the academic director and spearheading a lot of this community engagement work around data use for outcomes improvement. In part two, we'll consider the tantalizing power of machine learning techniques to meet some of the challenges posed by the unwieldy volume of data and literature on outcomes-based contracting. And I'm really pleased to welcome a very energetic and patient team of machine learning specialists. Professor Rob Proctor joins us from the University of Warwick, and the team from the Alan Turing Institute, Miguel Catania, Iman Bilal and Fang Zheng. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to this. We also have some GoLab colleagues waiting in the wings to demonstrate the tool to use. So more on that later. So to the first part of the session then. Julia, I really wanted to open with you because you've been involved so closely in an impact bond on the ground, understanding the use of data in real time. So could you give a flavor of how you've been using data and your reflections on that?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. As I was introduced, I work for the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, which is a UK philanthropy, but I'm based in the Nairobi office. And the development impact bond that I worked on was one that was co-funded with FCDO, so with the British government. It essentially worked so that the DFID at the time, later FCDO, were able to invest in quite a risky and innovative piece of work. We have been working with a partner who we've been working with for some time called Triggerize, who have essentially created a platform where adolescent girls can connect to service providers where they can access contraception and other sexual health products and services. We've been funding it for some time while it was still very new and therefore kind of not the sort of thing that a bilateral might typically invest in. We felt that it had a lot of potential. We felt that it was really exciting the way that it shifted power from maybe more traditionally doctors and nurses to the girls themselves. It allowed them to carry their subsidy to the provider of their choice. And it also just was very, very efficient in terms of kind of cost efficiency and ease of use for the girls themselves. In order to fund it, we essentially set up a development impact bond with FCDO, where they came in as an outcome payer and SIF was the investor. So we invested in the program, and as the program reached its targets, FCDO paid us back, and we were able to take on the risk on their behalf. The program has now been completed and was very successful. SIF has recovered its full investment. But one of the reasons why I think it was so successful was because as the investor, we were able to take a pretty active role in managing the investment because of the real data visibility that we had. Because the platform that girls were using was online and fed straight into performance dashboards, we were able to monitor just on a day-to-day basis how the program was performing, how successful its different elements were, look at how girls were behaving. So, for example, were they coming back to use it again and again? Did they tend to use it once and then never come back? And we were able to learn a lot about girls' behavior as well as their satisfaction with the platform. So that data allowed us to be very nimble as program managers. I would say, in addition to all the benefits of that arrangement, and we do consider it something that was very, very successful. We can reflect on some of the challenges that we did face. And a major one was on the costs and the time that went into setting it up. Unlike kind of a normal donor contract where you can kind of get approvals and contract and it takes maximum a few months, this arrangement took nearly a year to set up and took a huge amount of external and internal resources to build the contracting, agree on indicators, agree on what the outcome payments would be, to source an external evaluator, et cetera. And it became an extremely, I suppose, heavy program in that way. We certainly still feel happy that we did it because it allowed us to extend services to more than 100,000 additional Kenyan girls that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise. It allowed us to tap into a pot of funding that normally we wouldn't have had available for this kind of innovative philanthropy. And it allowed us to take on risk that was kind of appropriate for philanthropy as compared to a taxpayer-funded development organization. But when we look into the future of doing outcome-based programming like this, we definitely feel anxiety around the amount of time and effort that it took to get set up and running.
Thank you, Julia. I'd like to pick up on that theme of data visibility that you mentioned and actually link it back to one of the comments from Celeste at Village Enterprise yesterday. And Celeste, I think you described internal data that's being used very actively around performance management, but also using data externally, both for accountability and learning more broadly. And Julia, I was curious on your reflections of what data did you have sight of when you were preparing this project? And as you think about expanding the world of outcomes-based partnerships, what are the key questions, and do you have sight of the data that enables that?
Yeah, I mean, for this particular project, we had really, I would say, really exceptional visibility into the data of kind of day-to-day activities. So we knew exactly how many girls were registering, how many girls were taking up services. We knew what services they were taking. So we had a huge amount of just kind of management information that way. What was a bigger challenge was getting to the actual outcomes of that. So, for example, measuring a reduction in teenage pregnancy over an 18-month impact bond just ended up being really pretty impractical. And while the FCDO had an interest in paying on say, adolescent births averted, that wasn't really reasonable to measure in such a short time period. As you can imagine, unless someone happens to get pregnant really pretty early in your program, you can't really avert a birth during just that 18 months. And so using that sort of indicator, which though it sounds like it's what you're looking for in terms of an outcome, was not really practical, and it just became, and even checking on the actual number of pregnancies averted becomes incredibly expensive to measure. You have to run huge surveys over a very short time period. And it becomes impractical quite quickly. However, the management data that we had from working through an electronic platform meant that we were able to kind of do day-to-day program management rather than having to maybe use a more traditional management information system where you only kind of get a snapshot of how the program is performing every few months or every quarter or something. So having that was really valuable in the program's success.
I wonder if I could turn now to Sandro. we've heard from a practical perspective relating to a specific project. But Sandro, you're researching these things. You're trying to understand management practice around outcomes-based contracts. I would love to hear, what do you see as the key research questions in the area of outcomes-based contracting? And what are some of the data that you use or the data challenges that you face in that research?
So thank you. Good morning, Elle and others. So too bad not being there with you. Well, so I'm a kind of strategy and public administration scholar in between. So, and for me, the word is a kind of why that it must be explained by lots of X in the right side of the equation. And by having a good data set covering several countries, we can unveil several questions that have not only theoretical implications, but most importantly, practical implications. So one thing that we need to know is, well, what makes a OBC contract being more successful? Which design issues we have, under which conditions these contracts takes more time to be implemented, and if implemented, how about the challenges during the execution of the strategy? So OBC is like, if it taking a parallel with the private world of, it's like JVs, like joint ventures, other types of alliances. Successful alliances needs to have some conditions to generate public good, to generate public value. For instance, how about the capacity of the government who's contracting a partner to select good partners? How about the government's capacity to monitor those contracts? Is that capacity related to the successful performance later? How about the government's capacity to manage the entire OBC contracts, to establish good partnerships, and under which conditions or which micro foundations of those capabilities are able to generate value that's about to be appropriated by myriad of stakeholders, not only the provider, but also the disenfranchised populations. How about the mechanisms that we can have to better allocate risk among partners? So we have lots of questions, and by having comprehensive data sets with a lot of information, the GoLab data set is an embryo. Our data set, the Inspermetus data set, is another effort to answer those questions. As I said, we have lots of challenges, not only theoretical, but empirical. So I'm happy to be part of this community, and I stop here and just to listen questions and answer or engage in these conversations. Thanks so much, Al.
Thank you, Sanjay. I think some of those themes around data capacity, government capacity, it's questions that are actually beyond the management information that's directly collected in relation to a project, and relates to a kind of broader need for sharing different types of data in order to grow learning in this space. Mara, given these kind of use cases from Julia and Sandro, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this thing that we increasingly call a sort of emergent data collaborative. What is that? Can you talk about the approach?
Thank you, Elle. Very happy to. We are calling it an emergent data and learning collaborative because as an academic institution, we think the learning that can be generated from the data is really, really important. And data doesn't contain learning in itself. It needs to be interpreted. And it's important to do the sense making. So our collaborative is called Indigo. I have a couple of slides that I'm asking Juliana to share. What we do we call it a learning community because I really want to emphasize the learning aspect. What we collect data. We started our journey by collecting data on social impact bonds. When you collect data, you need to have a unit of analysis that is what you focus on. The plan is to expand to other outcome-based contracts, but at the moment, if you go on the Indigo dataset, you find information on all the impact bonds, classified, collected according to a standard data model. So we have common definitions, so you can compare like with like. But having the data, as I said, is not sufficient. You need to make sense of this data. And so alongside the data, we have a community, an energetic, enthusiastic community of people who want to use this data to see, can we generate better social outcome? And the community is as global as our data set. So we have projects from all over the world. And our community, the second chart you see here, are people that join our Hack and Learn event from all over the world twice a year to try to use the data set and see what this is telling us and how can I present this information in a way that it can be used and it can generate some ideas. In order to gather the data and link it to the community, we identified, like all data collaborative have a key figure, which is called a data steward. It's a strange name, and you think, what is a data steward? Many people think a data steward is somebody that analyzes data. Yes, but it's much more than that. The stereotype of the data analyst, and this is a stereotype, is somebody who sits in a room and is happy to tap away and is always on social media and doesn't enjoy particular social interaction if it's not through social media. It's a stereotype, but the data steward is very far from that because it's somebody who loves data. Like when they think about what to cook for dinner, they set up a spreadsheet, but they also love people. They reach out and they think data makes sense when it's contextualized and somebody is interpreting it. So they have a lot of people skill. They reach out to those who want to use this data, who need the insight from the data. And so it's a very particular figure that links the cold data to the warm insight and intuition. What do they do? As I said, you have hard data. There is a lot of data out there. Not all of it is shared, but I'm sure if you are part of a project, you had access to quite a bit of data, but making sense of it and using it, that's a difficult bit. And so the data steward tries to simplify the path from data to insight. I was particularly interested in your comment, Julia, on the high transaction costs. Like, I want to use this as an example. On the data set, we have information on the 251 impact bonds that have been launched. And it's rich of in information, but it's not all the information is there. The ambition is to increase the richness and depth of this information so that when we go and launch a new project, we consider about launching a new project, we lower the transaction cost because we have template contracts available. Maybe not all the term sheets, but we can see how contract structures, maybe there are in 4 different types. We have easy access to evidence that says, can I launch an intervention, a program with an outcome-based structure in this particular policy domain? Who has done it before? Which outcome metrics have been used? Are there case studies? Are lessons that have been learned? Can I build on the experience of others? And is something that is easy to find and navigate. And the ambition is that this will lower transaction costs and accelerate the time for you to decide which metric to use, how to design, or how can I pick up the phone and ask somebody, I'm interested in your project, can we talk? Because I'm trying to do something similar. So this is the ambition for what we're doing. And Juliana, our senior data steward, came up with this picture, which I love, to describe what we are doing. And data exists out there, and it can be very messy. You can be overwhelmed by data. A data steward and initiative, our collaborative data and learning collaborative, is to sort this data, put it in order, and arrange it, present it visually in a nice way, but in particular, tell a story. Making sense, what is this data telling us? And that is the crucial bit that we are trying to do. And I hope with the example of the machine learning, you will see an example of how you can put together information smartly to start telling stories.
Great. Thank you, Mara. We'll shortly be coming to questions. So if you have a question in the room, get ready. And if you are online, please either feel able to write your question into the chat or to raise your hand and we can come to you. But before I give that space to our participants, James, I didn't introduce you earlier, but we asked you to be a bit of a respondent to some of the themes here. James Westhead is Head of Engagement at Big Society Capital, where he's responsible for building awareness and understanding of the social impact investment landscape, helping to grow the market. And Big Society Capital is celebrating its 10th birthday. So you recently launched a report, Outcomes for All, on 10 years of social outcomes contracts. I wondered if you could offer some reflections on the learning that is happening around social outcomes contracting in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you like, having heard at the project level, the importance of data, for us, we're zooming out to the sort of system level, because our mission, as you described, is to grow the social impact investing market. We were launched a decade ago, which coincidentally was when the first social outcomes contract, the first SIB was launched. And so over that decade, we've been seeking to grow essentially the amount of money that is invested in social impact. And it has grown, just to give you a sense, roughly tenfold in that time, from 800 million a decade ago to nearly 8 billion today. So dramatic change. And similarly, in the outcome space, dramatic change, as we've been hearing throughout this couple of days. So from our point of view, data evidence is absolutely crucial to that mission of market building, and it can't happen without that data. The project that you referred to was we commissioned because after a decade we wanted to know what at a system level has been the actual public benefit of these social outcomes contracts. So Neil Stanworth from ATQ, who's here in the audience, did the actual work. So ask him if you've got any difficult questions. But essentially what it found, we asked him to look very conservatively, and people who were in an earlier session in this room will have heard that a little bit more about that. But he analysed around 90 social outcomes projects involving 180 commissioners, 220 delivery organisations, to give you a sense of that scale, across public delivering services from education through to homelessness, employment, justice, the full range. And he found, astoundingly, that for £1 of government money spent on this form of commissioning, £10 of public value was delivered in terms of better health, better employment, children's lives across all those spectrums. And within that £10 of public value, there was £3 of what we called fiscal value. That's including money saved from budgets and direct savings, cost savings. So in terms of what we've learned as a result of that is that this approach is measurably delivering real value, both to individual people, as the data at the project level shows, but also to the public. The challenge is how we use that now, because this approach, while there's growing energy at the grassroots level, it is dropping off the radar of national governments, central government decision making as a policy option. So the real challenge for us is how to build that understanding of that, the impact that it's having through data and evidence.
Thank you, James. I wonder if we could take some questions or reflections from the audience. Jacob, you were very quick there.
Question is sort of general and central question, that how can we realize better social outcomes? That tends to be a research question that we all want to answer. I picked up sort of a tendency to also be more mature to see components of or success factors as the perspective of research, which I welcome. So I'm just interested if you have any thoughts on, because you have a limited sort of perspective on evaluating SIBs, as I understand it. What's your thought on expanding that to successful programs? Because the components that successful programs indeed contain would be very interesting to also assess in SIBs as well. So if you can just elaborate on how research on wider successful programs can inform the research we do on SIBs.
This is an interesting question. I think it's a question for Elle, but I'll attempt an answer. Because it's true, like on Indigo, there is a list of projects, but it's what you do with it. In some of the earlier sessions in the conference, and you can catch up with the recordings, we discuss what we think are potentially active ingredients, like what are the mechanisms at the core of an impact bond. But we see this mechanism as not unique to impact bonds. Some of these mechanisms are like the fact that you have this active performance management, the focus on outcome, and so a clear definition of what good looks like, and the focus on the cohort, the type of organization that are part of this initiative. So there are some key ingredients that seems to make the impact bond mechanism work. And the role of the investor. You mentioned the role that you had, and I was talking to some colleagues like Pompey from Merck for Mothers, and they were telling how the role of the investor in the active performance management changed the way the program is run compared to program run as a grant. It's not there in the data set. This is there maybe in the case studies, and is there in the evaluation that we are doing, but it is true that the insights probably don't apply to impact bond per se. And one of the challenges is separating the success of a program. So what do you do with the people involved in a program, the children, the mothers, the person who want to reskill themselves? And another is having a clear theory of change of what is the role of the mechanism that you're using for accountability and to manage the program. So there are two layers, and the evaluation of the second layer separated from the program is very challenging. There are some opportunities. We are involved in the evaluation of the Life Chances Fund in the UK, and we are trying to do exactly that. We have an interim report coming out soon, and I don't know if you want to add some pre-views of our insights there.
I don't want to hog the mic with just one piece of research, because I think this is the challenge. There's so much out there, actually, and we're thinking about exploring some of those challenges, particularly in the second part of the session, where we will be talking about a data set that's far bigger than impact bonds. But I think this is one of the challenges, is how do we grow, both in terms of the depth of detail on particular projects, thinking about maybe contract details or other aspects that we can share, but also thinking about broadening the data set to things that don't class easily as impact bonds, because we know that an outcomes orientation can be brought in so many different ways. So I think that's an important question for the community, is like, what other tools, what other approaches are potentially out there? Do we need to start developing different data sets beyond the impact bond data set that capture characteristics of these other approaches and maybe where they're also being applied? So I think it's a work in progress, and I think the work is happening in and around this conference.
Let me give you an example of the expansion. Like, we recently launched a prototype pipeline of outcome-based contracts, and if you go on the pipeline, there is a type of contract, and some are impact bonds and others are other type of innovative ways of working. So it's happening.
Thank you. I'm also aware that this data is not perfect. It's a bit skinny, isn't it, that some of the data sets, and we're not capturing all of the experience. The rich experience is certainly not immediately visible. So I just wanted to come both to James and to Julia for some reflections on the challenges of sharing data beyond the kind of insular team working on a particular outcomes-based project, and sharing that more broadly. Julia, I wonder if I could come to you first.
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of day-to-day management data, we're generally pretty eager to show data. But I think there's an expectation when you share things externally that it has been verified, that it won't change, etc. And having data that's of that quality versus the sort of quality that's more instant and management ready is a bit of a tension. So you want to make sure that you're not sacrificing one in place of the other. Of course, for programs like ours, there's also a real data protection element. And while high-level data, that dashboards, et cetera, aren't a risk to anybody, there's certainly a lot of much lower-level data that you want to make. That obviously the most important thing is the welfare of the girls involved in the program. So you of course need to always make sure that is completely safe. I would also say that there's probably political risks depending on the area that you're working in. I mean, our program was implemented in partnership with the Ministry of Health. So at the kind of technical and policy level, it was supported. There are certainly many actors in society that don't want adolescents to have access to contraception, for example. So finding your data suddenly being used to mobilize for maybe perhaps more conservative elements that don't want this sort of program to continue is also a real risk, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd echo all of that. I would add that I suppose there is a fundamental tension between what the academic world is interested in and what the practitioner world is interested in. You know, the academic world want everything. They want to understand why. They need all the information. The practitioners want to deliver, want to get on, they want to grow, they want to deliver that impact. And, you know, candidly, if you're if you're an enterprise or a charity or an organization that's delivering, sharing information, or while you'll be within an outcomes context, be sharing lots of data with your other partners, sharing that publicly is a different thing. There is commercial sensitivity for the delivery organization. They may endanger their potential to win future contracts, for example. And there are also questions about whose data is it anyway? I mean, this is, is it the investors? Is it the fund manager? Is it the enterprise level? Or is it actually the ultimate beneficiaries? So I think I don't think any of these issues are unresolvable. And I think we need to work together to try and ensure that the most useful data is extracted and not data that can't, that is a risk to any participant.
Thank you. Thank you for those reflections. We've got GoLab colleagues who are working on the chat in Zoom, and I wondered if there is an online question that we might be able to bring in here.
The question says, how can an organization promote the data used for program management and decision making? Are there any case studies or something that you can recommend?
Sandra, I wonder if you would like to pick that up.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yes, the question said, how can an organization promote the data used for program management and decision making? Are there any case studies or something that you could recommend?
Actually, the data sets. So you take the example for INSPIR, Matches, and the GoLab data sets. Those data sets has a bunch of cases, several cases, in which you have all of the information. So some organizations can take a look on the practical examples about all the contract details in those data sets. That's one way analyze it. Let's suppose that an organization is interested in developing a housing project for disenfranchised populations. In those data sets, you have a selection of real world examples. So an organization can look at case by case. However, an organization can take a more analytical approach to try finding some patterns about successful partnerships, not that successful partnerships that were initiated or announced, but the contract was not implemented, or the contract that was implemented and didn't deliver the expected outcome. So there are lots of possibilities of exploiting those data. And this is why I think that partnerships between universities, research centers, and real world organizations, not only service providers, but also intermediaries, multilateral organizations, are key to develop the OBC community. So we have lots of things to learn each other by engaging those interactions.
Thank you, Sanjay. There are quite a few questions in the online chat, actually, and I'm going to try and put two together. There's a question from Graham Randalls who asks, the focus of the conversation seems to be on using data for evaluation at the level of the service or the SIB. Is anyone able to share thoughts on how data at the level of the individual is used for learning or improving services and achieving better outcomes? Julia, I'm going to merge this with another one and come to you. And then James Baster asks, on the question of who owns the data anyway, are there examples examples of how this issue has been tackled, thinking about terms that have maybe been written into the contract at the design stage?
Yeah, happy to. So certainly in our program, we really one of the advantages of running this program as a DIB was that it gave the implementer a huge amount of flexibility on what they implemented. So they were able to make changes pretty consistently without constantly having to come back to the funder in the way that you would with a grant. And they made many changes to improve the quality of services for girls. For example, they might add or take off particular providers in the platform so that accessing services was more convenient for girls. They might add or take away different features on their on the mobile application, for example. And they did do that many times, and they the routine data that we were harvesting was useful for a part of that, but they also did additional kind of qualitative data collection to allow them to be very nimble and continue to adapt as things went on. In terms of who owns the data anyway, I mean, I think even in our contract we did have we did have contractual notes on who has the right to use the data, to use it externally, etc. But I think it's important to note that in general, both in SIBs and DIBs, and in fact in all, even in grant contracts, the people who finally benefit from the program are generally not signatories are not involved in the contracting. They have no real representation other than the parties involved. So I think it is important, even if you have contractual rules on who owns the data, to also continue to go back to that. Is this morally right? Is this beneficial to the people who are the final beneficiaries and the final users of this program?
Thank you for those reflections on the need to be sensitive and practical in thinking through some of that. James, you mentioned that you're happy to take one of the questions. I think it's on the government involvement in this.
Yeah, I just thought that was an interesting question. What are the main reasons why governments are not taking this up more, and what has not worked with getting governments on board? And it's just the main. Obviously governments are on board to varying degrees, and the UK government has been very supportive in different ways. But I think, speaking generally, one of the issues around governments is that is the timelines involved. Governments want quick results. They want things within the timeline of their actual government, which is usually in this country 5 years. And social outcomes contracts are long term, and this work is long term. So that's one issue. The timelines are an obstacle. They want quick results. For political reasons, candidly, and that's a challenge that we need to overcome with the use of data and evidence, and that's why this conversation and the work that goes on here is so vitally important.
Thank you, James. Mara, we've obviously touched on some of the challenges, and what gives you reason to be cheerful on this? What are you feeling buoyed by in terms of the learning and data work that's happening here?
There are lots of examples of projects having an appetite to learn more. People who are coming to these events and they just want to learn from each other. I think our community is growing. There is a desire to see more social outcome out there, and I think it's the outcome focus that drives me. One of the things I like about an outcome focus approach is that it's a pretty visionary exercise, because it starts by asking people what is the outcome we want to achieve. And that draws in a particular type of organization, a particular type of people who want to see a better place, a better future. And so I have the fortune of working with very enthusiastic, visionary people who have a clear idea about what good will look like in the future. And these are great ingredients. So this is why I'm so hopeful. There are challenges in sharing data. There are challenges of sensitivities. There is challenges in understanding whose data is it. Am I allowed to share data even if I want? But those can be tackled one by one if there is a desire and willingness to create a better tomorrow, and if we want to get there faster and learn from each other. So there are obstacles, but I remain optimistic because of the self-selection of people that come around these discussions.
Thank you, Mara. We'll have an opportunity for more questions in the second part of our session. But I'd now like to pivot us. If that was the bold vision for a future of more data sharing and learning, let's think about the art of the possible. I'd really like now to turn to our team from the University of Warwick and the Alan Turing Institute. But before we get to hear about this new tool, I'd just like to encourage those who were at the conference last year to cast their minds back to a session we called Art and Science, making sense of data, making sense of the landscape of outcomes-based contracting and commissioning. One of my colleagues has great creative flair, and Rory, during that session, drew this picture. It's a picture of all of the different terms that had been used to try and describe this way of partnering. We've got social outcomes contracts, development impact bonds, pay for success, public-private partnerships, program for results, etc., etc. And we describe this as a complex patchwork quilt and challenged ourselves to think about whether we were making the most of the evidence when it goes by different names. Are we doing as much as we can to read across the world of evidence about using an outcomes orientation in partnerships? We described an incredibly audacious systematic review where we had tried to pull together evidence, both what we call grey literature. So this is material published by governments or other stakeholders, official evaluation reports, but also the academic literature, thinking about everything that's been peer reviewed, but that offers something empirical on outcomes-based partnerships and contracting. Gosh, that was ambitious, and an enormous amount of data has come through that systematic review. If you could move me onto the next slide. Yeah, this guy's being hit in the face. Yeah, it felt like that. After we have carefully filtered and screened the abstracts, we're still left with over 2,000 papers that have something to say on the practice of outcomes-based contracting and partnership. And we were quite tight and quite specific in what we included here. And you can read about the protocol and approach that we took, both in a lovely blog that Harry has put together, but also in a formal protocol online. This is too much to chew. We are in the process of conducting very tailored synthesis work that looks at bite-sized chunks from this data. But frankly, working in a world of practitioners who immediately want to make use of this, we felt that that wasn't good enough. And Felix and others had the suggestion of making more creative use of machine learning tools to help us navigate this data set. And so I'm really pleased to welcome the team who have been helping us on that project. And I'd love to pass over to you, Rob, to describe how we came together.
Thank you, Elle. And on behalf of myself and the other members of the Warwick and Alan Turing team, that is to say Fang and Iman and Miguel, I'd like to thank you, first of all, for inviting us along today to talk about our collaboration, but also for having the patience to work with us in the first place. It's not always easy to work with people who have a more technical background. So how have we come to be working with the GoLab? Well, I expect everybody here has heard about machine learning and how it's going to transform the economy and society and so forth. And it's also true that people talk about how machine learning can help researchers to do more advanced and more complex research than they could manage before. And in the UK, the Alan Turing Institute was formed about 6 or 7 years ago to lead the development and application of machine learning in different sectors, and including in research. So the vision here is that new machine learning tools offer the prospect of investigating questions that would have been impossible to answer a decade ago because the volume of data would be too much to analyze using traditional methods. This report by Demos that I worked with Demos on for the Joint Information Systems Committee, JISC, sets out what I hope is a fairly grounded picture of how machine learning might be applied in research. And I want you to keep that grounded thought in mind because it's very much driven the way that we have approach trying to mobilize machine learning with the GoLab team. So next slide, please, Juliana. So one of the research themes within the Alan Turing Institute is data science for policy. And it's in that context that Felix, Miguel, and I met and began working together on 2 projects that have policy-related objectives. One was to develop machine learning tools to assist citizens to take part in budgeting decisions by local authorities. And we've written about that in the paper on evaluating the application of NLP tools in mainstream participatory budgeting processes in Scotland. And that work is ongoing at the moment. The other project that we got involved in was working with a mediating team that was helping to resolve the conflict in Yemen. And we developed some tools for them as well. And we've written about that in the paper, which has just come out in the Data and Policy Journal, called Supporting Peace Negotiations in the Yemen War Through Machine Learning. So if you're interested in following up on those projects, you can find these papers online. Next slide, please. So a little bit about methodology now. As we've taken what we've learned from these 2 previous projects forward, one of the things we have learned is you've got to follow a very participatory approach, or sometimes now referred to as co-creation. Now, participatory approaches for design development of IT systems are actually well established, going back to the 1970s and the Scandinavian movement in participatory design. What it does is it enables working up common ground between, on the one hand, users and developers of systems. And what happens is that users are able to learn what is feasible technically and how this can inform their requirements. On the other hand, developers, technical people, learn about the application domain and gain a better understanding of how users' goals can be supported technically by developing new tools. And going back to what I was saying about machine learning, there's been a lot of, I think, exaggerated claims about what machine learning can do. And we have been very keen to avoid the project that we've worked on with the GoLab being influenced by exaggerated visions of what's achievable. We've tried to establish what is practical, and the dialogue that we've had with the GoLab team has been essential for doing that. We've met every week to review progress, to share feedback on early prototypes of the tool that we've been building, refine the requirements, and help to refine also the ultimate goals. And what you'll see later on today is the culmination of that effort over the last 6 to 9 months, I think. I now want to hand over to Miguel, who's going to outline the technical approach that we have taken to realize the project.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, so let's dive into the technology that we have used. This project has been possible thanks to major breakthroughs that have been happening in machine learning in the field of natural language, so the field of machine learning that has to do with the language as we use it, we humans. And in particular, thanks to the development of what is called language models in the last 3, 4, 5 years. These language models are machine learning software that can perform complex tasks using human language. So for example, a task could be take a document and summarize it, or take a document and translate it. It's a task that is probably too complex to design a software where you need to specify how to do the task because it's too complex, the task itself. But we can use machine learning where we don't need to explain the software how to do the task. We need to show the software examples of the task and the software learn to do it by itself. So this is the important change in what is machine learning. So first of all, we have to develop these language models that first of all have to understand what is language and how we use language. So for that, this software is showing examples of large corpora of text. For example, the Wikipedia, data set with tens of thousands of books, and we show the software how we use language, how we construct sentences, which words come together, etc. Once the software have this basic understanding of the language, then we can train the software on one of these specific tasks to solve one of these tasks. And for example, in the next slide, we can see one example of this task. This is the name entity recognition task, where the software, given a text, has to identify the entities that are included in the text. For example, in blue, we can see the person that appear in the text. In red, we can see dates. In yellow, geographic locations. So different entities that have, that we don't provide the list of entities before, we just show the text and the software identify what are the entities in different categories. This is one type of task that we can do. In the next slide, we can see another task, topic modeling and text classification. So we have different documents, and just reading the content of the documents, the software is able to understand what are the main topics and categorize all the different documents in those relevant topics. Or if we have experts that are working with these articles, they can provide some keywords to identify the main topics. And again, the software is able to categorize all these documents. So this is one of these possible tasks. In the next slide, we can see another task, semantic similarity. So given different sentences, to identify if the sentences are really similar, are saying the same thing, or talking about the same thing. So one very simple example from the slide, the sentence, how old are you? Or what is your age? Are asking the same thing, but with very different words. So we are able to identify that is the same question, or different questions, but are very related to the same topic or the same issue. So this is another possible thing that we can do. And in the last example, as I mentioned before, summarization. So we have a large text, an article, a book, whatever, and the machine learning model is able to identify what are the relevant sentences part and write a summary of the content of the text. So when we have this example of task, we can now apply to the specific problem of systematic review. For example, taking the first task, the name entity recognition, we can identify all the key organizations that are working on different topics on the issue and what are the relevant actors, players on working with that. We can select all the relevant articles according to which actors are present on the articles. We can also find which organizations tend to work together in the same topic or in the same area, etc. Identify relevant laws, regulations. So we can identify these entities and use it to understand what is the content of the articles that we use for the review. With the second task, for example, topic modeling, we can understand, even when we're talking about this type of contract, we can understand what are the main topics that are usually appearing in these articles in the reviews, or we can retrieve all the articles that have to do with specific topics that we are more interested. For example, we were identifying regarding the Sustainable Development Goals, which articles talk to each of on each of the different goals. Or regarding the semantic similarity, we can find all articles that have to do, that are similar to previous articles that we have found that are interesting. For example, we have a team of humans that do some pre-screening of articles, but they cannot look at all the possible articles. And then we have other articles that are similar to the ones that have been screened before. So these are the kind of applications that we can use to then apply this machine learning software to the tool. And then in the next slide, now we will present the tool that we have built, because of course now the objective is to build a tool that we can use and everybody can use without even knowing the details of the technology. And the tool is just made public right now. And we think that usually tools we're very used to new tools, new software, new websites. So it doesn't look very exciting, but we wanted to make it exciting. So we are gonna do a very formal opening ceremony of the tool to make it the importance that it has. So if Rob, anybody can please get fun. So this is the official opening, and now Fan will explain in more detail what is the tool and what you can do with it.
Thanks, Miguel. Thanks, Miguel, for the presentation. Now let me introduce the tool, Sirocco, Systematic Review of Outcomes Contracts Collaboration Machine Learning Tool. We incorporated the machine learning technique Miguel introduced before and developed a user-friendly data dashboard to support the exploration of the information extracted from these machine learning techniques. The data dashboards are composed of 3 different panels: a visualization panel, an information panel, and an article list panel. The visualization panel is presented on the top left side of the slide. It allows users to switch between 3 different types of plots to visualize the data, including an interactive word map, bar charts, and a similarity graph. The information panel is presented under the visualization panel, which displays information about articles that meet the selected criteria. We also include an article list panel to list all articles that meet the selected criteria and allow users to easily search and access specific articles. In the next slide, we introduce the interactive map. The interactive map shows the distribution of articles that mention different countries. The darker the color of a country, the more articles mention it. By clicking on a particular country, users are able to access the information of all the articles mentioning the country. For example, in the slide, we set the country threshold to 2 and selected the United Kingdom in the map. It shows that there are 213 articles mention the United Kingdom at least 2 times. The overall information about these articles is presented in the information panel under the map, which we will introduce later. It provides a way to narrow the list of papers and direct the attention of users to papers where the country of interest is mentioned the most. And in the next slide, we introduce the interactive bar charts. Users are able to view the distribution of articles by published years, by corresponding policy areas, or by mentioned countries' income levels, which offers an insightful look for researchers and policymakers at various levels of granularity. By clicking on a particular bar, users are able to access information of all articles under the specific criteria. For example, all articles published in 2020, all articles belonging to health policy sectors, or all articles mentioning high-income countries. And in the next slide, it is the similarity graph we implemented. So the graph shows the semantic similarity between different articles. It allows researchers and policymakers to quickly explore the connections between different articles. Each node in the graph represents an article. The solid line between 2 nodes indicates that the 2 corresponding articles are similar. We used a semantic text similarity algorithm to calculate the similarity. If the similarity between 2 articles is greater than a predefined threshold, we display them in the graph and connect them by a solid line. The similarity threshold can be set by the similarity threshold slide bar shown on the left side. By clicking on a particular node in the graph, we are also able to access the detailed information of the corresponding article using the information panel. In the next slide, we introduce different features. So we also implemented different features so we can feature articles by policy areas, by mentioned country's income level, by published years, or by financial mechanisms, which is a type of outcomes-based instrument. For example, we can find all articles mentioning impact-bound project by selecting impact-bound project in the financial mechanisms feature. It gives us 394 results. Then in the next slide, we set the publication years feature to the last 5 years because we are more interested in articles published in recent years. So this narrows down articles from 394 to 278. Then in the next slide, we also feature articles to focus on specific policy areas. For example, by selecting health and education in the policy sector feature, 18 articles are returned. For these 18 articles, we can view their overall information in the information panel in the next slide. Yeah. So this includes the policy area distribution of these articles. So we apply the topic modeling and the text classification algorithms to automatically categorize these articles into corresponding policy areas. So for these 18 articles, 11 are related to health, 7 are related to education, while 3 articles are also related to environment. So this is because some articles were categorized into multiple categories. From this information panel, We can also view geographical locations they mentioned, key organizations active in these articles, relevant laws and regulation, financial mechanisms mentioned, sustainable development goals mentioned, as well as indigo projects mentioned. These entities are drawn from a named entity recognition algorithm and are ordered from the most mentioned entity to the least mentioned. By selecting a particular entity, we can view all articles mentioning it in the next slide. So for example, for the Indigo project, Educate Girls, we can see that it is mentioned 42 times by 2 articles. We can also view the project detail in the Indigo Impact Bound dataset, which is an open dataset created by GoLab to supply insight information about different Indigo projects. So the occurrence of the entity in a specific article can also be displayed by clicking the plus button. And if we are interested in a specific article, we can simply click in the article and it will lead us to its detail in the next slide. So the detail includes its author, its corresponding policy area, its abstract, its relevant entities, as well as the suggested similar articles, which are also generated by a machine learning algorithm. And that's all from me. And let's welcome my colleague, Iman, to introduce our future steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fang, for the insights into how the tool looks like at the moment. I'll talk about what we envision the next steps to be and what are our goals for further improving the tool. So as you have seen so far up to this point, the tool is capable of helping with the screening, the filtering, and the initial analysis of supporting systematic reviews. However, we're looking to further that even more. We would like to broaden the scope and improve the tool to be able to synthesize the information of the full textual information in the data. In the next slide, we would like to introduce these next steps where we aim to further understand the content and the structure of the corpus by implementing machine learning techniques such as automatic clustering and automatic summarization. So basically it would be very nice, for example, to understand what documents have in common, what they discuss about, and whether documents talk about common ideas and common topics, and to actually group these similar articles. The tool is already capable of doing this to a certain extent, as Fang has shown in the graph, in the similarity graph. However, we look forward to developing it to be even more robust. And we think that identifying and grouping similar documents will help reveal further topics hidden in the data, which are otherwise not made obvious by a simple keyword search or a screening of titles and abstracts. In the next slide, I will talk about automatic summarization. Basically, once this corpus is partitioned into these clusters of similar documents, we would like to produce summaries of each of these clusters, while also reducing the perhaps redundant information among the articles. We aim for these resulting summaries to synthesize the main points in the articles across selected topics and articles, and we would like to show the summaries to the user for their inspection who is using that tool at the moment. And as a systematic review ultimately analyzes and summarizes in depth a large volume of documents, providing us support to reveal and summarize these topics is a crucial step for researchers and policymakers who are in the early stages of understanding their corpus. And finally, in our last slide, I would like to show another important direction we would like to pursue in parallel, which is the interpretability and reliability of our tool and methods. As perhaps some of you have heard, deep learning is quite popular at the moment. However, to the people using it, this can often be seen as a black box whose decisions are quite unclear. However, we would like to make sure that our own tool remains accountable and trustworthy to the users. So we'll make sure that
its decisions are transparent, and this will also help with the reproducibility of our project. All in all, we hope that these future iterations of the tool will broaden the scope and increase the efficiency it offers to the support of systematic review, while of course maximizing the benefits to scientists and the policymakers. Thank you very much, and my team and I welcome your questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Iman. One of the things that we're hoping to do is make this a little bit more concrete by showing you some use cases. So Felix is currently working as a policy advisor in the Department for DLUC, Levelling Up Housing and Communities. And Felix, I wondered whether you might give us an overview of how you might use this tool. We're going live now, so fingers crossed, everyone.
Yeah, this is our Steve Jobs moment. We're trying to talk you through this. So I'm a policy advisor at a ministry. I've been tasked to design a program on homelessness prevention, and there should be some kind of element of outcomes-based contracting in it. But unfortunately, I'm from Germany. I have no idea what this is. I need help with this. So I need something that tells me. It gives me a quick overview of the field of what this is about, but I also need quite targeted evidence in order to kind of build my project. So as I'm working in the homelessness sector, I would start and select my sector. I say homelessness. I click on apply. And then we see that it's loading, giving me time to think about my life. And this is already significantly reduced the results. So this is already much more handy for me to kind of digest. I know, okay, we have 49 articles that I can read down here. I get this information that we've extracted through the entity recognition. I know something about where this is happening in the world, what kind of organizations are involved in these tools. Interestingly, I see that there's this term impact bond somewhere. I've heard, a colleague told me about this. I'm a little bit curious, and 49 papers is way too much to read for me anyway. So I deselect this and I say, let's go a little bit more detail and kind of delve into these impact bonds things. Okay, I apply the filters and I'm getting 29 results. Okay, that's much better. So I have the same kind of information, but now targeted and filtered across the same entities, across this particular selection of things. So now it's, I think, time for me to look a little bit more deeper in what's actually what the evidence is like. So I have down here my my articles. I'm a forward-looking policymaker. I'm interested in the future and the now. So I filter. The most relevant articles are for me are the youngest ones. So I filter here across the year. And I also want to have information that is accessible to me very quickly. So we have the link here that takes us straight to open source evidence. So I can skim through here. I can see Big Issue Invest. Oh, that's interesting. I click on it. And then I get really the kind of more granular data about this particular article. And I get at a glance a little bit of an overview of what this article is talking about. So I know, there are projects in there in particular areas in England, okay, Cornwall. I know who the institutions are that this article is talking about. I can see other relevant articles that I might be interested in exploring a little bit further. But really what I need is very granular information because my boss wants me to design an outcomes framework. So I really need to understand what, how did these projects do it properly? So I have this interesting link here, mentioned Indigo projects, West London Alliance, I've heard of it before. And so I can go and click on the Indigo link. And what I get is very, very granular data on this particular project. I know how much money was involved. I know what the target population was. I have outcomes that were sought to be achieved, etc. So I think you're getting the gist of it. So we've basically come a long way from a very global, high-level overview of outcomes-based contracting to very, very granular information, project-level information about one particular project. And I think this is really where the magic comes in, because what we've been able to get here by combining two very different types of data sets, one that is produced with the help of machine learning that is based on the evidence collected by the systematic review, which gives us a high-level overview of the field,
and with the best data available, with the very granular information that we've collected through the Indigo data set. And we really want to work in the future to integrate these two data sets even more, so you can do the same journey the other way around, right? So you would start with with an Indigo project, and you would have a list of all of the available evidence that we've sourced through the systematic review. As a policymaker, this is gold, because obviously I can go into a project, I know who the relevant people are, what the relevant project is, and I have immediately my evidence in my hands. So I hope you will enjoy this tool. I pass over to Harry, who will tell us a little bit about another use case and how the more academically minded people might be using this tool.
Given a demo from the researcher perspective, we'll also open it up to questions. So please do start thinking of questions. You can add these to the Zoom chat, and we'll also open it up to the room. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So for my scenario then, I'm imagining that I'm a researcher who is...
you don't need to imagine.
Yeah, beginning to develop a research agenda on post-conflict and fragile and context, and the use of outcomes contracts in those contexts, which is also true. So yeah, let me continue to explain. Okay, thanks very much. So let's say that I have some policy connections in 3 countries: Afghanistan, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone. And so this is where the focus of my research is going to be. So the first thing I can do is begin to find out what information we have on those countries simply by hovering over them in the map. So with Afghanistan here, we can see 47 articles there. Rwanda, we've got 144. And over in Sierra Leone, we have 16. So I've already learned something about my area of interest here. We've got a far more developed evidence base in Afghanistan and Rwanda than Sierra Leone. So that's already shaping the kind of questions I'll be asking. But as Fang was referring earlier to the country threshold bar here, so those numbers I just outlined offer only two mentions of a country in an article, and it is included. So I'm thinking to myself, that's not sufficient. I want the articles that are more precisely focused on the countries of interest. So let's say I think 6 mentions is a sufficient number of times to let me know that there'll be more substantive content within the articles. And while it loads, we shall just pause once again for some background music, perhaps.
Rethinking the research question.
Yeah, in light of the up-to-date information I've just received, Okay, I'll continue with the scripted part, and then we'll see if the website catches up. So if I was then, okay, I've got my threshold bar now, great. So let's return then to Afghanistan. So we see now there's 22 articles here. So the number of articles reduced, same in Rwanda to 79, and same in Sierra Leone. So to get more information about the evidence then, I can click on the country itself and then scroll down. And this is giving me that list of 22 articles at the bottom, which I can already begin to read the titles and find out about. What I can also do, which is going to aid my focus on Afghanistan in this case, is click on the geographical entity. And now it's the same 22 articles, but it's telling me how many times the word Afghanistan is actually used in each article. So 137, 19, and so on. So this is going to direct my search for literature. If they're mentioned many times, these might be the articles I go to first. But even for those that aren't mentioned a lot, so let's say 8 mentions here, okay, that's not that much. But if I click on the plus sign here, it actually shows you with snippets the context within the article that is in which the word is embedded. So I see, okay, post-conflict Afghanistan. So this is linking up with my interest in post-conflict settings. So I think perhaps I will look at that article after all as well, even though it's just got the few number of mentions. And clicking through, of course, takes you then to the abstract, as we've already seen. So from the research side of things, I'm thinking particularly of literature reviews, refining research questions, understanding where the gaps in the evidence are. And so I think the tool can be really instrumental for the research side of things, as well as policymakers. So it's really excited to have been able to show you this today. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for helping us see the potential there by giving us a demonstration of the tool. I'd love to open up now for some questions. There's a fast hand at the back, and so we'll take two, I think. So we'll go to Chi Hung first, and then over to you, Jeff, and then we'll see if there are some questions from the online audience. Chi Hung.
Congratulations to everyone involved. I think the potential of this, it's just setting my mind whirring. My question is, are all the source materials in English? Because even when we look at impact bonds, it's now in 36 countries. And if it's all in English, I'm just afraid there's a slight risk that we reproduce some orthodoxies without even knowing that there are those orthodoxies being reproduced.
I can start, and then maybe we'll all take a little response to this. So in terms of the initial search strategy that we used to source the underlying data set, we did not focus only on English language texts. So Vanessa is in the room as well. Vanessa helped with the search strategy here. We worked with the policy advisory group to identify relevant terms in a range of other languages and also use those to source the underlying data. But I'll hand over to the machine learning team to reflect on the degree to which the tool can handle data that's not English.
Well, it's the case that we've only focused on developing support for documents in English at the moment. It is entirely possible that we can expand to support documents in other languages, subject to some of the machine learning language resources being available. Of those resources, there are more available for English than there are other languages at the moment, but work is rapidly advancing to provide support for a much bigger range of languages, and we would look to take advantage of that in due course. I don't know if Miguel want to add anything to that?
To insist on this idea, this machine learning software works by training the software with examples that we had before. So of course, the kind of data set that already exists and collection of books and everything in English is much, much larger. And for the research community, it's also much easier to work on that. But of course, there is a very specific field of research on low resources languages to try to increase these possibilities. And also to be able each time to use a smaller amount of examples in order to train the software. So each time it's possible to make it better with even languages that we don't have so many resources. So this is a very important field of research.
Fortunately, the natural language processing research community is very collaborative. So the resources that are available are expanding all the time.
Thank you. And thank you for that provocation to make sure that we keep this as open to evidence coming from a range of places and in a range of languages. That's really helpful and galvanizing for us. Jeff, I saw your hand go up as well. Could I bring you in?
Yes, Jeff Moxley from CIPA. It was a very similar question, actually. And you know how, Elle, you showed that quilt of similar concepts, but just called many different things in the English language, and how, gosh, if you translated that to other languages that aren't in the Western Hemisphere, for example. I wonder if there has been any studies as to the bias that introduces. So even if we can't replicate this tool in other languages, whether or not we have a sense of, if we've worked with language specialists who study languages, could give some sense of scale as to the bias that it might introduce, not just in our understanding of social outcomes contracts or things like that, but also the future trajectory in terms of how these instruments are developed, particularly from a policy perspective.
Thank you. Do you have any reflections on the language challenges, Miguel?
Maybe something that I think is important, this is one of the future directions of the research, is about this idea of interpretability of the machine learning tool. So essentially, as we have told before, since you don't design the decisions that the machine learning is taking in the process, it acts by itself in some sense. So sometimes it's difficult to really understand which were the decisions or what kind of bias is there. So this is why it's very important to now design part of the tool that it makes it clear, interpretable, and we can understand what bias are present and what kind of decisions were correctly or incorrect, and so on. So this is a very huge, also active area of research, but it's also a very difficult area of research because by itself, by how we build this kind of tools, is difficult to pick insight on how they do. But also I want to stress again that even when of course, now we're looking at the tool and technology and thinking on these kind of things, but a very important part of the project also was the collaboration part of the project, as Rob was mentioning at the beginning. So all these kind of tools and machines and everything makes no sense if they are not like a team of humans and experts working with it, try to understand the results, to polish them, to filter them, and so on. So this is why also for us was easier to work on the English language, understand better what bias were present or what problems or mistakes or whatever, and maybe a bit more difficult in particular for our team to work on other languages. So there's a human part also that is not just about the tools, it's about building a diverse human collaboration that then can explore more in detail what is happening and what are the results.
Thank you. Julia?
I think they're really important questions. And I think that as much as in some ways English is a kind of a shortcut to noting how not diverse the world of outcome-based funding is. I mean, I think obviously the majority of papers written have been written about experiences in the West. The ones that have been done in developing countries are predominantly with outcomes set by agencies out in the developed world, right? Who are funding work as a philanthropy or as a bilateral donor. And then there's very limited evidence on what works when priorities are set locally. And I think we had a really interesting session in the last session talking about working for outcomes that are set by the people who are actually using the services, which is excellent. I've never heard of that, to be honest, on outcome-based funding in developing countries. There tends to be a very technical, very Western-led process. So I think I think the observation that we've built this for English because English has so dominated the current space is a good one. But I do think that it's a good way to start thinking about how can we decolonize this more comprehensively, because that's a much bigger piece of work, and it's one that, to be honest, I think hasn't even really been started.
Thank you for that, Julia. I'd like to pass the mic now to Juliana, our lead data steward, who's been instrumental in getting this tool off the ground. Juliana, I'm curious as to whether there are any questions from our online participants and also any reflections.
I don't see any questions here. I see comments and very good feedback, so that's helpful. There is someone asking if we think that this tool is just for outcome-based contracting, or there is any chance that we could extend the tool to some other sectors too.
The short answer is certainly the techniques that we've been developing can be applied across a broad range of documents and objectives. So we'd be very pleased to talk with anybody here today who's interested in the possibility of using machine learning to facilitate their own research. And you can contact us, I think, through the GoLab team, through Mara, Elle, and her colleagues. So we'd be very interested if there's any follow-up about other applications of the tools that we've been developing.
And I don't see any more questions, but I do have some things that I want to say too. So I want to make use of the microphone. We really want this tool to be helpful for everybody, not just for us researchers, but for the community of practitioners, for the evaluators, for the commissioners, for everybody who is working with outcome-based contracting. So please go to that bottom that says want to provide feedback and complete the feedback survey. It's really useful for us. We really want to know if this is useful for you, and if this is not useful for you, we also want to know that. Please complete the survey, because this is the only way that we have to understand if you are making good use of the tool or not. And there's also an Indigo stand outside in the Inamori forum. Please come have a chat with us. There are some iPads and there will be some laptops, so you can play around with the tool and maybe you can provide some verbal feedback too. There is also one Indigo Hack and Learn going on right now. It started on Wednesday, but the real work is going to start on Monday, so you are still on time to join us. We have some very interesting challenges around the impact bond data set, some other challenges around education outcomes projects coming from this systematic review. We're also working with the OBC data set from INSPER matrices. So I think it's going to be very interesting, and we would love to have more people from the Social Outcomes Conference. That's it on my side.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say a big thank you, because this is an enormous collaboration that's underpinned this work. I'd like to say thank you to you in the room as well for your questions, for your ongoing engagement and support, also for humouring us with the ribbon. I think when it comes to a lot of the Indigo work, we live life in beta. We're always trying to develop and improve this tool. And it means we don't always have these glory moments where you've got something very shiny and very new. So thank you for humouring us on that. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined us online. It's really good for you to engage. And please do see this as an ongoing conversation. I know the team are sticking around. So we're really, really looking forward to your reflections and to keep the conversation going. So thank you, everyone.